Welcome to our inaugural episode of Crowd Talk, and we'll be discussing issues related to equity crowdfunding and the general startup phase in Africa and beyond. I'm very, very happy. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the founder's journey from ideation to seed funding. Seed funding being the type of funding you get very early on when your business has had potentially some level of market traction, but you still need to grow and you still need to invest a lot in resources and people and other things so that you can actually service the market that you're looking at. And these are the types of things that we're going to be discussing. So we have a perfect example that I'm excited. On screen, you'll see Ms. Dudu Muilwa. And I've known her since high school, which was just 2-3 years ago. We're not going to age each other here. And she's a co-founder at Dukwa, and she'll give you the right pronunciation. But essentially, the team is doing last mile distribution services for the informal sector, primarily in Kenya and other markets. They were taken on board by Techstars. I believe it's the Ontario branch. And congrats to you, Dudu. Well done to you and the team for that. And as a result of that journey, they were able to secure $2 million in seed funding. So throughout this conversation, we're going to be covering multiple topical areas. We're going to talk about ideation, maybe how they came up with the idea. We're going to talk about market validation. Is your business or your product or your service, is it serving a market that wants it? Or is it something that you think the market wants and maybe they're slow to respond, right? We're also going to talk about whatever types of networking they've had to do in being able to fast track their pitching and ultimately their funding. So welcome, Dudu. Please just give us a brief of who you are, your elevator speech, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, thanks a lot, Batho. Like you've introduced me, my name is Dudu Muilwa. I come from a background primarily of human resources, which is what led me to work for a certain multinational DHL in Botswana. So that's really where my journey started in the logistics world, and where I met one of my co-founders, Victor Miner, who also worked for DHL at the time. So DHL is really where the scene was set, although, obviously the idea came a little bit later on. But that's where I think the initial exposure to Africa and logistics and things like e-commerce really started happening there for me. A little later in the journey, I met David Sangweni, who's our other co-founder. And yeah, that's really where our journey to Duka began.
Okay. No, thanks a lot, Dudu. So just as a warm up, as we get into this thing, because there's so many places we can take this discussion. Just set the stage for us. Let's talk about ideation, and just have some markers around from ideation to the point where you guys were seeded, and maybe even to the point where you are today. So just walk us through that journey.
Okay. So initially, I think one of the things in conversations with Victor that we really started to see was the fact that when it comes to logistics, it's very different when you look at, say, a product moving from, say, somewhere in Europe to Africa, right? Very smooth journey. Then you enter the African space, say a particular country in Africa, and there seems to be sort of for lack of a better word, some kind of breakdown in terms of now getting this particular product from a port or an airport or whatever it is to its final destination somewhere within this particular African country, all right? So, at that stage, it sort of pointed to the fact that there's some kind of disconnect when it comes to the African logistics space. And, particularly in Kenya, we started to see that there's a large market of informal retailers who don't seem to be a part of the the bigger distribution space. They're not serviced by anybody at all, right? So there's a sort of movement of products from manufacturers to distributors to retailers, but you have a whole other market that exists of informal retailers who actually service a huge portion of the population, but there's no connection there. There's nobody servicing these people. So a typical duka owner, so you have, these small retailers are actually called dukas in Kenya or in East Africa, would every day have to close their shop, travel maybe say 20 Ks or 15 Ks to a place where they can get the products that they sell. And in many cases, they have to travel maybe to 2, 3 different locations in order to be able to access everything that they need, right? So they then travel back to their shop, open shop again and sell. But in the meantime, they've lost time, that they could have been making sales. There's the income aspect of it. They have to actually spend money traveling to various places, getting their inventories, and then returning to their stores. They also operate small operations. There's additional sort of cost to them. It's one of the barriers that's getting in the way of them expanding these small shops that they run, right? So there's a loss in terms of potential income, but also the costs that they face in acquiring these inventories. So that's where really the idea started to come together to say, but surely there can be some kind of technological innovation that can come in here that can make this process a whole lot easier, where somebody sits in their shop, they look through our app, they see everything that they would normally buy, and they can just pick what it is they need, have it delivered to them without having to set foot outside of their duka, without having to spend money even on traveling to various locations. So, that was an idea which needed the right technical skills now to start to actually put a product together. And this is where Davis now came in, because Davis has a long sort of a rich history as a software developer, having worked on a various projects. So he came into the picture, somebody with just the right skills to be able to start building this product, right? And we really wanted to get to a point where we could say now we have a minimum viable product, like an MVP. Okay. So, we went through this process of having the product developed up to that stage. We had a customer sample now, where this is at the point where we were starting to validate, right, of about 200 customers. And we were now at the point where we could say, okay, we're satisfied that we have something that actually works and that people potentially actually want. So around January 2021 is when we officially started trading now. We had that MVP, like I said, and we made a choice to bootstrap for a certain period of time. So I'd say from around the initial ideation phase up until the point where we raised our first check was about a year or so. And we chose to bootstrap simply because we wanted to get to a better valuation and raise at that slightly higher valuation. So around October 2021, our first, we had applied for Techstars. That's where our first sort of check came from. And I think that really began the process of us now, through referrals, through the network that we built through Techstars, we were able to now start engaging with more investors. And it's a process that I think as a business owner, you really need to give yourself the time to go through it. You can't raise at a point where you're 2 months to running out of money, right? So we went through that process over several months. I'd say give yourself 3 to 6 months, closer to the 6 months probably than to the 3 months, for you to really do a thorough job, meet as many investors as you possibly can. So that is a competitive process as well. So that's been our journey, Eventually in July, it was July 2022 when we announced, the round. We had closed the round with, $2 million. And it's been, I wouldn't say it was an easy journey. I think for some people though, it can take longer. It has taken longer. But I think it's always a journey where you learn quite a lot, you find maybe you get into a discussion that is very, very promising, and you think, okay, that's it, this one is in the bag, only for things to, completely go the other way. And I think that that's something you just have to be open to, talk to as many investors as you can, until you have that money in the bank. That's when you can say, okay, successful fundraise, because yeah, anything can change along the way. So that's pretty much where we have been, in terms of raising. Yeah, we can.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that you've shared in this, and I mean, we could go on for hours and hours and hours, but um, I think I just want to, you brought up something that was, I think, very important. You decided to bootstrap, so you
Yeah.
decided to self-fund, and the
Yes.
reason why you wanted to self-fund was to get a better valuation. Please just unpack that and maybe explain the dynamics of what actually went into that valuation a little bit. We don't have to speak numbers, but the
Yeah.
types of things that an investor looks at, that, was it the right decision for you guys to bootstrap, or in hindsight, could you have gotten money earlier? Just some thoughts around that.
Yeah. I think, yeah, we made that decision, looking at the fact that, very early on we had very little revenue or traction to talk about, and giving ourselves a few months to start to build that traction, to have a bit of a track record, put us in a better position. Um, it was, I think that's one of the things that is key, to actually have some revenue to talk about, to have some market traction, that you can talk about, that puts you in a better position as far as valuation goes. Even in terms of now, trying to forecast sort of your future prospects, having something to demonstrate, to say, okay, this is how we've been doing, this is how we've been growing, sort of builds a little bit of reassurance on the part of the investor to say, okay, so this is something viable. This is something that, there's actually evidence of it, you know, having a space in the market and actually producing those revenues. So we wanted to just sort of safeguard ourselves in that regard and actually build that track record. I think for us, it was the right decision. It's not always the right decision for everybody. Obviously, it depends on whether you actually are able to bootstrap, without sort of
Right. Right.
impact other aspects of your life, and I think when we raised at just the right time for us. Bootstrapping for the time that we had been ideal. We wouldn't necessarily have wanted to bootstrap for longer than that. Um, so I think it's an individual decision. It takes a lot into consideration in terms of the particular business that you're building and how much money it needs. Bootstrapping might not even be an option for certain types of businesses, and whether
Right.
you can sort of comfortably take it in stride for a period of time. It does take a lot of personal sacrifices to be able to do that. So that's certainly one thing that you want to take into consideration as an entrepreneur. Can you go possibly for a certain amount of time without a salary? It might translate into that, or a lesser salary than what
Bread
you're
and
used
butter
to.
issues.
Exactly, bread and butter issues. So yeah, that's really for us was the key thing, the building of the traction and starting to get those revenues flowing in, and that's why we made that decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your growth trajectory, if you can talk to the numbers. When you launched, you had tested the market, so you had about 200 potential customers. Can you talk about that? Because I think it's a very important thing when it comes to customer discovery, product market fit, because I
Mm.
think after you've laid the foundation of the pre-work that you did, it may actually show us why you have been able to have the journey that you had.
Okay. So, okay, let me just get that clear. You want me to talk specifically around the customer growth?
the customer growth, but initially, how did you get those 200? What were you doing? How were you testing? Because you had not really rolled out the service.
Yes, yes. Okay, so there's quite a number in addition just to the market validation. There's quite a number of things that we did in preparation. We knew what market we were targeting, right? So it was a matter of us actually now going into that space and actually establishing contact with some of these potential customers, like your typical Duka owner, right? And just having that direct sort of engagement, having direct engagement, finding out what some of their needs are around a product like this, and having them actually test and place orders on this app and see the outcome of that. So we did that, like I said, times 200, and evaluated, the response, evaluated how well the product was working, evaluated even just the initial impressions of the product, and whether this is something that could potentially meet their needs. So from those results, I think we were satisfied with, okay, so we have a product that we can build on, and it's certainly something that we can move forward with, right? So that was what we did. Now we had other preparations that, what we called it the 3 Ps. It's just to keep it in mind, and so that we could easily remember it. But it was around people, performance, and product, right? So product is just is the part that I've just talked about, ensuring that indeed this product that we have is, number one, it actually does what we think it should do, but number two, it also meets the needs of the people that we're trying to service, right?
Right.
And then the other one was around performance, which was around traction. So that's one thing that you also would want to look at in terms of ensuring that you have that data, right? But it could either be performance or projections. So that second piece, performance or projections. In some instances, it might not be able to really have or build that, that picture. So you'd want to work off of projections, especially in, products that are maybe very like first in the market type of products, or maybe in the instance where you're raising very, very early and you're basing projections on maybe similar businesses offering some kind of similar service, right? So that's where you'd walk off your projections. The other thing really was around people, right? Making sure that the team that we have now is the right kind of team, especially now we're looking forward in terms of what we want to do, but also engaging with investors. Would an outside investor looking in be able to say, okay, these people have the necessary skills, these people have even the track record in terms of what they're bringing to Duka. So, in addition to the product, like we said, we also, those are some
things for you as founders, not people you're going to hire. No.
This is us as the founding team.
Yep.
Myself, my 2 co-founders, as well as the 1 or 2 additional team members that we brought on very early on to support what we were doing. So we needed to really look carefully at that, to say, okay, what skills do we need? Do we have these skills ourselves, or do we need to bring somebody on board who has these skills? But also, are these people who, if you introduce to an investor, would be convinced that they have the necessary track record to be able to build the business that we were trying to build, right? So those are the preparations that then went into those are some of the things that we sort of went into as we prepared, knowing that a few months down the line we're going to have to start raising and talking to investors, but also even just in the life of the business, these are things that you would need to have in place. Of course, you need to know that your people are the people you want to build with and you want to move forward with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. YZ, Dudu, there's so much to talk about. Like I said, we could just turn this into a conference and bring all sorts of people in. But we did promise them from ideation to seed funding. So maybe let's just talk a little bit about getting into Techstars. Why was it important to get into Techstars and the value that it brought to the Duca team?
Okay, so the journey to Techstars. Prior to Techstars, we'd taken part in a smaller incubator that was focused on the East African market. And it was through a link that we had through this incubator that, we really started to consider Techstars. It's something that was brought to the table as something that, we had the potential possibly to be able to make it into Techstars. And it's something that we needed to give up, to apply our minds to, whether it's something we want to go through with. So as we got to know more about Techstars and the potential benefits of participating in Techstars, we started to see that the network that we could build through a platform like Techstars, the sort of exposure that we would get. This is like an internationally sort of acclaimed kind of a accelerator. So immediately, you have Techstars backed company there on your website. It gives you a level of credibility that otherwise you probably wouldn't have. So we had to look at all the potential benefits, versus, are there any potential drawbacks? In the end, it was something that we, through engagement now with some of the Techstars stuff, we thought, okay, this is definitely going to be worth it if we make it. So we made the application, and luckily we made it. We were the first Kenyan company to make it into Techstars, and we were part of a cohort that had the most African companies since Techstars had started. I think prior to that there had been, I think, 2 which were Nigerian. I don't remember. Yeah, it was a small number. I don't remember if it was 2 or 3, but primarily Nigerian. So the first time now, Techstars really looked at the potential of African startups and seeing a lot of potential coming out of Africa. So out of that particular cohort, I think there were 8 of us from Africa, 1 from Kenya, about five, I think it was from Nigeria. Then there was 1 from Rwanda as well. So making it into Techstars proved to be, like I said, something that was very, very good for us. Number one, the accelerator program itself. You find that as founders, we all bring different skills, different backgrounds, different strong points, right? But we really need to be, at least on some level, need to be able to talk to various aspects of the business. So going through that accelerator program meant, some of our other co-founders and members of our executive team were able to now start getting sort of an education, for lack of a better word, around some of the things that maybe previously they wouldn't have had much exposure to, and through people who've been there, who've done that, people who've built successful startups, some of them have even sort of exited, so are much further along in the process. So you get access to a whole host of mentors, whether we're talking financial modeling, whether we're talking marketing, whatever it may be, that's the sort of exposure that we got through Techstars. And coming out of Techstars now, or at least the accelerator program part of it, was the exposure to the investors. Like I said, we went through our demo day. I think immediately after our demo day, you start to get those emails hitting your inboxes, of people, who are interested and who want to have a chat. And that really, I think, went a long way in terms of getting us started in the fundraising journey. And it's through also those initial contacts. Some may just want to have a chat, and you discover they're not necessarily the best fit for you, but they have other people who definitely they know would be more aligned with what you're trying to do. And so they can refer and recommend other investors who might be more aligned with your particular path. So I think that's like I said, one of the key things that we got out of and continue to get out of Techstars is just the network and just the founder support. The founder support goes beyond the actual accelerator program. It's a continual. You have continual access to different kinds of materials, different kinds of people who are able to sort of point you in the right direction with whatever challenge you might be facing. So I think, should people go for things like Techstars, if it's relevant, if you're building the kind of business that Techstars would be interested in, I think certainly worth going for, because what you gain out of it is something that is going to carry you for quite a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So when we spoke about the customer growth, we got the initial of 200. I think an interesting thing would be, by the time you got into Techstars, what sort of traction in terms of from a customer perspective were you presenting?
By the time we got into Techstars was around October. We were looking at, I think, just over 1,000 customers. If I remember correctly, it was around 1,200. Yeah, which was towards the end of that year, October, November. So yeah, we had grown considerably. And yeah.
Product market fit.
Absolutely, product market fit.
You developed something that people wanted, and I think a lot of times we sort of get it wrong, or and I'm not speaking to empirical evidence, but as entrepreneurs, because I've been one myself, you work on an idea for years and years and years, and you never wonder, why are people not buying? So it means you're not developing, you're not producing a service that people want.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's really what I also love about your story. It's not necessarily the velocity of, oh, January opened, October we're in Techstars. When you sort of start peeling off the onion, the story is what we built was what people wanted. And that for me is an absolutely beautiful story. Thanks for that, Dudu. So there are quite a number of things I would still like to explore, but maybe just unpack a little bit for us the process of pitching to investors and the most important elements for a successful pitch. I mean, I know you've mentioned team, which sort of speaks to execution. If I give these people money, are they ready to deploy it and create value from it? So yeah, talk to us about that.
Okay, so you obviously would, even prior to the pitch, would want to do your research. In as much as some of your investors are probably referrals from your network, but it's always a good idea to do your own research. So some would be people you've approached yourself based on the research that you've done, or even if they're referred, but you've done a little bit of homework to know that at least this conversation is potentially one that can lead you somewhere, right? So that's one part of it. And prior to pitching, also, you would want to have at least like an investor data room ready, so that depending on the outcome of the conversation, if the next step is now, okay, send us such and such a document, at least it's ready and you don't have to run around like a headless chicken trying to get it done in like the 24-hour deadline that you have. So you really want to get your investor data room at least with the basics of, the documents that you would likely need, or the investor would likely need from you in the event that you proceed with the conversation, right? But in terms of the pitch itself, you obviously need a pitch deck. You'd need to create that presentation that, whether it's a PowerPoint, Google slide type of presentation, you'd need a pitch deck to work off of. And okay, we've already talked about team. Somewhere in there, you would deal with the team that you have and how they are relevant and sort of they are the right team to take this particular enterprise forward. You want to give a snapshot of the product itself. What is this product? What problem is it solving, right? So you want to talk to the problem and how your particular product would be solving that problem. So you really want to give an overview of the product without necessarily having to go into very intricate details of how it works, but just highlight, okay, here's the product, very sort of high level idea of how it works and how it would be solving the problem that you're solving for, right? You'd want to define the market, right? There's obviously a total market out there, what we normally you call a total, what is a total addressable market, and zoom in now in terms of your obtainable market, right? And because that's really what's relevant, right? It might be that, there's in the whole wide world, there's maybe, I don't know, 7 million small retailers, but are you going to be able to reach that 7 million small retailers? Are you ready? Do you have a product that tomorrow can go to Europe, to Asia, to the Americas? No. So you really want to now define, okay, this is the addressable this is the obtainable market that we are looking at. So those are some of the things that you need to demonstrate that you've thought about, you've quantified, obviously in a way that's relevant to the type of business that you're talking about, right? A brief sort of view of your financial projections would be good. A slide dealing with if you've already built some sort of traction, you would want to address the traction that you've built so far. And then your ask must be there up front. What do you need and what are you planning to use it for? What do you a breakdown at least of, okay, X amount goes to, I don't know, labor costs, marketing, whatever it might be. I think in your pitch deck,
I'm laughing. Sorry to interject.
Yeah.
I culturally, and I don't know if Kenya suffers from the same thing.
Yeah.
But Botswana, it will be like, I'm gonna speak in Setswana and translate. It will be like, "Nyam, phamoko le nteng hela."
Precisely.
So we have that discomfort with saying, listen, I believe my business needs $5 million. That's what I'm asking for. It's almost like there's a mental block.
Absolutely. And it goes back to what I'm saying, if you're able to actually point to where this $5 million would be going, like give a breakdown of, I'm not just pulling $5 million just out of a hat. It's because, for us to be able to get the team we need, for us to be able to get the kind of marketing we need, for us to be able to develop, get the developers and the UI, UX designers and so on and so forth, this is how much we're going to need to spend. So then at least it gives the confidence that you've actually thought about what needs to go into making this business a success. It's not just a number that's there like, okay, we need $5 million, here we go, So I think just demonstrating that you've thought about some of these issues, certainly it should give an investor confidence that you've applied your mind. And talking about, thinking about what goes into the business, the other thing that you'd want to address in your pitch is the competitor landscape, at least identify your main competitors if they are there, and how what you're building would be different from what these competitors are offering. It doesn't need to go into a great big sort of long breakdown. I think it's something you can do in a slide. One slide you can demonstrate, okay, these are the competitors, this is how we're different. And yeah, I think at most 10 slides, you can do your pitch in 10 slides or less, doesn't need to be longer than that. If now you get an opportunity to go, you maybe have another presentation where they want more details, break down things more, then you can have a full deck of slides that expands on some of these areas. But in terms of pitching, those are the things you really want to touch on. And like we always say, at least make it visually appealing. Don't just go put bullet points and then go rattle them off. Make it visually appealing. Everybody, I think, wants to see something that is visually appealing, but the success of the pitch doesn't depend so much on the visual appeal. It depends on the content, but the visual appeal just adds to the experience.
I think it's part of the storytelling. You've got to tell a story. You've got to walk the investor through. And I mean, you have to appreciate you're also selling yourself and selling the business. So you've got to make people excited about wanting to be a part of your journey.
Yeah.
Excited in to part with their hard-earned dollars, right?
Exactly,
So,
exactly, exactly. And that's
okay.
a very important point that you bring up. It's not just a series of slides. You have to actually create a story. You have to tell a story, you know. So it has to be
Mm,
logical in the way that you've sequenced it. You know, here's where the story begins. Most likely it'll be you paint a scenario that illustrates the problem that you're trying to solve, right? And then from this problem, this is
mm,
how we proceed and so on. And this is how we plan to address this problem. These are the implications of trying to address this problem, you know, and then you end off with, like I said, the ask. So you really want to weave a story into it. You want to tell a compelling story. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, they are human beings. You know what I mean? You're dealing with human beings who also want to have
eh,
a particular type of experience in talking to you and to engaging with you. So
mm,
certainly you want to
mm.
create a compelling story.
Okay. No, thanks, Dudu. I think we're just gonna open it up to a couple of questions, ones that have come up as we've been discussing. And I think a particularly curious one that comes up is, can you talk about any challenges you faced as a founder from a diversity and inclusion perspective and how you approach these challenges?
Okay. I think, yeah, very important topic. I think very, very topical, very current. Um,
And it was Women's Day the other day.
yes, absolutely. For us, I'll mention two things. One has been around, we've been very deliberate from the very beginning. To focus on inclusion of women, right? Because I think coming from Africa, probably the whole world, yes, but in Africa especially, it's still something that you find that women are lagging behind when it comes to being in certain spaces, you know, whether it's technology, a lot of decision making spaces, you find that we have very low representation of women. So we've been very deliberate around, we want to economically sort of impact women, right? Through number one, through these dukas, because you know we found that in Kenya, especially, you have 67% of these dukas are owned by women, right? But
Right.
also through the people that we employ, right? Tech is still a very male-dominated space. So you know, to get more girls, more women interested in tech and enter in the tech world. So while we've been able to really push and make it happen within our organization, it's not something that is very easy to actually realize, right? Getting the right kind of tech skills is something that we've had to now take the position to say, okay, we have to now think about actually building these skills from scratch, because you won't find a whole lot of women, and the few women who exist in that pool, everybody is trying to get at, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a very big pipeline. So it's like now we have to also have, you know, to impact those spaces where these skills are being built, you know, whether it's in universities or colleges, and try to see how we can influence that, right?
Mm,
But the other thing around diversity and inclusion that we've experienced is that around, you know, definitions of diversity, of inclusion, for us the focus is around women, because that's what's immediately relevant when we look around our immediate
mm,
surroundings. But you might find sometimes, especially in engagements with investors, you know, your priorities are not in the same place. um, you're dealing with somebody whose idea of inclusion is targeting a different demographic or a different group of people that it's not that you don't want to look at, but at the moment
mm.
maybe you're prioritizing something else that is much more directly sort of relevant in your world. So trying to really get to a point where you expand your definition of you know what inclusion really talks to, um,
Mm.
while not losing sight of what you were initially trying to do. I think it's one of those balances that we're still working on, you know. Um, and we hope to get there to a point where now as an organization we can say, you know what, we're truly diverse in all the aspects that really matter. But you know, it's also a resource thing, you know, how far can you go with the resources that you have, you know, to really talk to all the different aspects
Yeah.
of what that really is about, you know. So I
Okay.
think having at least a plan as to, but this is how we're going to get there. it'll take time with us, focusing on one aspect and the next aspect and the next aspect. Um, it does help. But in the meantime, just creating a mindset to say, this is the type of organization that we need to be, and these are the sort of mindsets we need to be building in our people.
All right. No, awesome. Thank you for that. So there's another interesting one. So how do you decide how much equity to give up when seeking seed funding?
Ooh,
How much
how
are
do
you
you
giving?
decide?
What process did you guys go through? I mean, we don't have to talk specifics, but just, yeah, that's an
I think
interesting one.
for us, we, as co-founders, it's something that I think we had discussed upfront in terms of this is the equity that we have, and once we start talking to investors, this is how much we're releasing, right? But of course, it wasn't set in stone, because once we started talking to investors, we found that there were areas where we needed to now perhaps make some concessions, given what we could potentially get out of those relationships. So it took us going back to the drawing board and really weighing to see, but what's the potential benefit to us releasing perhaps more equity than we initially had agreed upon, and so far we haven't really been put into a corner to release more equity than we needed to. I think it was really around with each case. Number one, seeing what's reasonable, but also, what we stand to benefit from that particular relationship. The process of us getting to funding, I have to say, is a two-way process. In as much as we're looking for investors and we're the ones who are looking for the capital, we're also vetting investors. We're also vetting investors and seeing, okay, you're getting into a long-term relationship with these people. Are you, number one, are we going to be able to work with them? Are we going to be able, potentially, if we experience sort of difficulties along the road, are these the people we'd want to have by our side, and so on. So all these considerations came into play when deciding, around, when making some of these decisions. So I think some investors, we were the ones to actually say no, rather than them, being the ones to turn us down.
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody comes and demands 50% of your business right up front, without you really knowing, but apart from the money that you're putting in, what else would he be gaining? Then that was an obvious no, But we were going for, what somebody termed as smart money, right? So somebody who would bring to the table more than just the money that they were bringing. The people who were bringing, certain types of support, certain types of support, let me put it like that, just the kind of support that over and above the money, it made it worth our while, to release a certain amount of equity, looking at even going into the future, what we were going to get out of the relationship. So those are some of the considerations that really went into how we decided then.
All right, awesome. I'm just going through here trying to look at it. I think some of them you've already identified. Like there's a question that says, how important is it to have a strong team in place? We've looked at that. And then I think another key one, probably so that we can have one or two more questions and wrap it up, is how did you, in your personal capacity and maybe even with your co-founding team, how did you stay motivated and focused during the ups and downs of the startup journey? Particularly, I guess, when you have that anxiety, what will it work? Maybe you've left your job and how do I do this life thing? There's no income right now.
Yeah. I think we've stayed motivated. The first thing was just the belief in the product itself, and actually going out there and seeing that, this product is actually making an impact. It's something that has the potential to grow in a very big way. I think at times when things are getting a little bit tough, we go back and just review, okay, this is where we started, this is where we are now. So already just that picture for us it takes us back to why we were doing it in the first place, and I think just also educating ourselves about some of the typical challenges that those who've built before us have encountered. I was telling one of my co-founders the other day that when we were doing the Techstars Accelerator, we had a particular session with a former founder, and the sort of challenges they were talking about then. I remember saying to one of my co-founders that, you know what, I hear the story, but I don't see how we could possibly go through something like that because, we have our story straight. Fast forward a year, we were in a very similar situation. I was like, this is why you have, some of these programs, so even if you don't really see it happening to you, it helps that somebody had gone through it. When you're going through it, you recognize that, this is what they were talking about. So you can put it in the right amount of perspective and not completely fall apart and say, why is this happening? It's something that at least the idea, existed at some point. You knew it was something that's happened to other people, so you won't die from something like that. So I think having the right mentors, having the right guidance certainly goes a long, long way for us, not throwing in the towel too early. And just talk to people who've done it before. I think that helps a lot because it puts a lot of things into perspective. Yeah, I think that for me helps a lot. You know that, what, I can survive this, provided I obviously put the right mechanisms in place to avoid it becoming a recurring thing, So I think,
Yep.
yeah, we're at a point where, yeah, already, in our short sort of 2-year life, we've been in those situations where we wonder, are we still going to be here tomorrow? But here we are, and the trajectory continues. The upward trajectory continues. So
Mm.
yeah.
No, great one, great one. Technology has just told us we're running out of time. So let me just throw the final one for you there. So what's your advice for founders who are in the early stages of their startup journey? I think you mentioned a little bit about feeling overwhelmed and discouraged. Um, what is, if there was one thing, what would you say to somebody who says, I want to go out there and build a business? What would that be?
Okay. I think have the right people around you. Just really do your homework around the people that you bring on board, the people that you have around you, especially the people who have the biggest impact, your co-founders. Build the right kind of partnerships, people who have the right skills, but also people that you really can truly work with, because in those really down times, you need to be able to get along with these people. There's nothing like going through a really rough patch and you're surrounded by people that you can't even stand. So really go out there and ensure you have the right team, but you also have the right mentors and the right kind of guidance, because that will also determine a lot in terms of what path you ultimately take. So I'd say invest a lot in making sure you have the right people around you.
Okay. Wow. Thank you very much. Time moved way too quickly. I had personally ton more questions, and I know that people want to know more and more and more. We just can't get enough. I'm inspired by your story, you with Victor and your other co-founder. I'm inspired by Duka. We'll keep a close eye out on you. And good luck, and thank you so much for spending time with us today, Dudu.
Thank you so much, Batho. I think, yeah, a very enjoyable conversation. Yeah, and I think maybe one we can follow up on, a little further down the line.
Yeah. Where are they now?
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Thanks, Dudu. Cheers.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much, Batho.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, okay. How was